finally, a source of raw, real, and honest information on healthcare issues that matter most. Welcome to BS Free MD. From the latest medical information to how to stay sane as a doctor or a patient, no subject is taboo, no BS is allowed. Now, let's welcome your hosts, Doctors May and Tim Hindmarsh.
Hello and welcome back to BS Free MD, the podcast that brings you BS-free conversations around medicine, family, faith, really conversations around topics important to all of us. And we're your hosts, Doctors May and Tim Hindmarsh. Today, we are thrilled to bring you and dive into a transformative journey from trauma to triumph with our special guest, Dr. Lida Fatemi. An acclaimed academic, board certified in internal medicine, specializing in palliative and hospice medicine, Dr. Fatemi is not just a physician, but an author, national speaker, and a beacon of knowledge in the field of psychedelics and mental health.
Dr. Fatemi's journey is nothing short of remarkable. Immigrating from Iran at 14, she has overcome immense challenges to become a respected voice in medicine. She's the brain behind Conscious Physician, a unique program designed for healthcare professionals grappling with burnout. Also, she's an author of the bestseller, Thriving After Burnout, and is currently working on her new book, Trauma to Self-Love. I just want to add, we have wanted to talk to somebody who was really experienced and rational in the world of psychedelics and counseling. And boy, oh boy, did we find someone with this interview. Just amazing.
Yeah. So here we go into our conversation with her and how, we get to learn from Dr. Fatemi's extraordinary experiences. So today we are diving deep into transforming trauma to triumph with Dr. Lida Fatemi on psychedelics and mental health, which is a topic we've been wanting to really get into for a long time. So we're so happy we found her. Dr. Lida Fatemi is an award-winning academic board certified internal medicine physician practicing palliative and hospice medicine. She's an author and a national speaker with mainstream media appearances and fascinating background on her, which we'll get into. She immigrated from Iran when she was 14 and has an amazing story about her life there. She's also the founder of Conscious Physician, a psilocybin-assisted coaching and certification program for burned out healthcare professionals. Oh boy, do we know about that. She educates the international community on trauma healing with the use of psychedelics. And she has co-authored the bestseller book, Thriving After Burnout in 2023, and is working on publishing Trauma to Self-Love, Conscious Life Practices, and Psilocybin. And she can be found online at Dr. Lida Fatemi. That's LidaFatemi.com, as well as Facebook and Instagram, which we'll link later. But welcome to the show. Thanks for being here and taking the time to just share with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So first of all, I really want you to share. We were talking a little bit about this before we started recording about your background, and like us, although I think we can't count ourselves as full immigrants, Canada to the U.S. is just cheating.
Well, Canada is America's hat.
That's right. So tell us, about your journey from Iran to the U.S. and how you got here at age 14 and then, into medicine. How did that initiate?
Yeah, it's quite a story. I didn't think it was quite a story until years later when I've done all this inner work to really look back and see, wow, that was quite a journey to get to this point. The first 8 years of my life, I lived in war. In fact, my mom was pregnant with me during the Iran-Iraq war, and she was just sharing with me last week how, they would go down to the bomb shelters and the bombs would be dropped and I would be shaking in her womb. And so, trauma happens from when you're in the womb, especially if your environment is conducive to such things. And so I grew up in war for the first 8 years of my life, didn't know any different. And the first 14 years was under the terrorist regime of Iran, who used Islam religion as a way of oppression and control, controlling the population with utter fear of, from the point of when I was 6 years old, couldn't show my hair, that it was my fault that men were attracted to women's hair and you had to cover it, to every day hearing somebody's dad getting kidnapped by the government because they said something that was slightly anti-government. And so, and then everything in between, we would have, teenagers who were holding hands, male and female, who would get jailed and whipped. And this is continual. This is for 45 years now that's going on. And just recently, last year, there's a woman life freedom revolution that's happening in Iran, which is magnificent. It started with teenagers, straight up teenagers who are saying no more, teenage women, teenage girls. Yeah, and they're taking the bullet. And then they got joined by men saying, okay, we will also support you. And so became an entire country revolution. And it's continuing to go on. So going back to my childhood, as I was sharing with you guys earlier, it was full of collective trauma. My culture is all about community and holding each other. And so for a long time, I was loved by my parents and my family and our neighbors. Everyone was just, very cohesive in the traumas we're going through it. And so I didn't see it as trauma, because I felt safe at the same time as I didn't. And years later, after I became an attending, that's when burnout hit for me. And that's when I had to really revisit and be like, what is happening? Why? And why am I feeling these symptoms of burnout? Burnout to me is just a collection of symptoms of things we're not dealing with, of these self-betrayals that we have endured over time in our medical education. But a lot of us have actually done that all of our life for various reasons. For me, it was, hey, you have to be a good girl to survive. It was a survival strategy. You have to please other people. Forming vulnerable connections with people was very difficult as a young adult for me. And, later on, I became a physician, an award-winning physician. And, some of all those things are really, I want to do my best and be my best. But some of it is people pleasing as well, right? And system pleasing. My grandfather was an internal medicine physician in Iran for over 40 years. And, I saw him practice medicine and have that sacred relationship between patient, doctor. And that's really what drew me to wanting to be a doctor. Little did I know my role in America is going to be system pleasing. And so I practiced that for 10 years, as an academic hospitalist. And about a year and a half ago, I left, but not even a year and a half ago, a year ago. I left
No, sorry. So a year and a half ago, so what was the tipping point? Like, what was the final straw, so to speak, where you're like, okay, this is, my life is not going in the direction that,
it was the knowing that I was harming patients. The way we prescribe medications, the way we're so forceful with medical practice, because we have to meet metrics and discharge numbers and admission numbers and notes and, just keep going and going. I'm like, this is not the way I imagined practicing medicine. So I was like, no, not anymore. And let me tell you, also I have a background in psychedelic medicine used in my own self-evolution. And when you use these plant medicines, they teach you things from a very different perspective. And you're like, oh my gosh, I am full of self-sabotage, full of it, and full of self-betrayal. And why am I doing this? I loved the aspect of academics and teaching residents and teaching medical students. Did that. I loved it. Won many awards for teaching. But then I was like, what am I teaching them?
Right. Wow.
So it's interesting because we just did an episode with Mark McDonald, who is a very outspoken child psychiatrist in Los Angeles, and he's speaking out about a lot of what the insanity in the gender world, et cetera, et cetera. But it's fascinating because his whole thing was it comes down to moral courage, and this whole idea of moral injury, and ultimately you made a moral decision because it's immoral to harm patients knowingly. I mean, obviously we're going to make mistakes. That's humanity. But if you look at medicine and you say, what I'm doing now is actually not 100% in the patient's best interest, you can't do it anymore and stay moral and have a conscience. And I remember being at hospital meetings where, we're like, well, look, this is dumb. Like, we shouldn't prescribe this anymore, or we shouldn't be ticking these boxes and taking time away from patient care. And the answer you would get is, that's the way we get paid. And my brother, who's also a physician, said, well, not questioning the morality of our act is like a prostitute not questioning the morality of her job. I just have to do this act to get paid. And I think there's the majority of physicians that are stuck in this moral quandary, and they've got tons of debt, and they're working hard, and they're making decent money, and they just don't see a way out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was definitely in those shoes as well. So I did approach the 10 years for my PSLF, the public service loan forgiveness. And that definitely helped me take the leap of, okay, I'm done with this, but, man, I don't think I could take another day of doing that and being okay with myself.
Well, and that's it. I mean, we both reached that point, and I can tell you it was amazing because it gets so blurry. You start to blame medicine. You're like, medicine sucks, and
yes,
it doesn't. Mm-hmm. Like, I can tell you now, after the last 2 jobs that I've had, that actually when you're unfettered from seeing patients, it's actually pretty fun. I mean, it's an awesome gift to have this skill set that people find valuable and that you can, speak into their lives. Even if it's 10 minutes at a time, it's still unbelievably profound to me.
Yeah.
But I have likened what the system has done to us. It's like tennis. Okay, so you're playing tennis and you love tennis. You love the smell of the ball when you open the little canister, and you love hitting it. But then people start to bring their dogs to the tennis court, and eventually they just poop all over the tennis court. And now you have a dog poop tennis court. So every time you go to hit the ball, you're being splashed. And you just I give up. Tennis is terrible. I give up tennis. No, the problem isn't tennis. The problem is the dogs that have infested the tennis court. And I think in healthcare, we let the dogs infest the tennis court instead of being in the dog park where they belong.
Yep, absolutely. I love your analogies, Tim. Like,
he's got some pretty good ones for sure.
They're usually kind of profane, though. So
I love it. How did we not know each other before this? This is great. May and Tim, like, you guys are awesome.
But it's so true. So many people, I think, also, and I'm speaking, for us and myself, who go through that burnout, and it was huge. And I'm still on the other side where I'm like, I'm kind of done. And then my story is a little bit more convoluted because I always struggled to really figure out how much I liked medicine. So it's kind of I had a comeback story because I didn't even think I'd last almost 30 years, but I did. But, we'd be driving home sometimes together from shifts because we worked at a similar place, and we would literally be like, I know for myself many times, but both of us would be looking in the back of a semi thinking, I could just drive, or an oncoming one, I could just drive into this. It would be so much less painful than going back tomorrow to where I came from. And we know that with female physician suicide on the rise and all that's going on, and people being so frustrated, and obviously patients frustrated about the care that they're not getting from their physician. I mean, there's so much burnout, but I think so many people don't want to share and talk about how they're feeling.
Well, the thing
That-
if I
go
may
ahead.
interject a little bit about suicide. So physician suicide is a very real thing. And I went down that rabbit hole one day at work and I just started doing, looking at the statistics. The thing that's interesting is male physician suicide is not significantly different than other males in similar jobs. Female
Right.
physicians kill themselves at wildly higher rates than any other similarly aged female cohort. That is an absolute total disaster. Like that,
Mhm.
that is so out. Women tend to not kill themselves compared to
Yep.
men. And then, but there's this one job, which is supposed to be this great job that completely skews the dynamic. It is so hard to understand, but it's like, my gosh. So where are you now? And how did you go from, being the hospitalist to what you're doing now? And you're obviously smiling, so you must love it.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And, I've gone through several renditions of it in the past year to figure out, hey, where do I belong, or what do I want to do? What's in alignment with me at this moment? And right now I'm doing palliative. I'm a medical director of a palliative and a hospice practice. And it's run by just awesome people. And they really care about their staff and their employees. Richard Branson said, take care of your employees and they'll take care of your clients. And if we did the same thing in healthcare, we would be in a very different place. And so this is a place that does that, and they stay true to it, and they're very engaged. And if I don't want to do something, I just say it and it happens. And if I want to do it, then they're like, okay, let's go for it. And so there's that openness. And also, who do you want to work with is the question. And these are people that I want to work with. But it took working with a couple of different hospice companies that became corporate. And I was like, forget about this. I'm not doing this. Is not my cup of tea. The corporate world sucks at running anything medical. Let's take your hands out. And, we're talking about people who, as you said, have half the education or intelligence and they're running these big companies and taking care of patients in ways of, let me see what your metrics are. And compliance. And that's all they talk about. I'm like, sayonara, I'm not here. Bye. I've been there, done that, not interested. But also knowing, that you have options is really nice. When I was very burnt out as a first and second year attending, I felt like I had no choice. I felt like, I'm shackled by these golden handcuffs of the income and the benefits, and I got to be here for my student loans, and I did at the moment. And it really, and then I didn't have a community. That was a huge part of it too, a community that was understanding, and a boss who was understanding at the time. And understanding, I'm not talking about, getting a raise and this and that. No, I'm talking about those heartfelt connections. They just were not there. And so, super dark moments of my life, super dark. And, it's interesting, before I got burnt out myself, I was doing a ton of research in burnout, and I was very aware of the suicide rates in medicine. And I brought these up to our administration, to our education department, and, they were kind of like, oh, whatever. And then next year, one of the second year residents killed himself. And then they really turned their heads. They're like, oh man, this is a real thing. So that was kind of a shock to the whole program in a good way. But then again, they bring up, these superficial band-aids.
Yes.
It's nothing is deep and source driven in medicine, unfortunately. And, as I'm going through my own burnout, and then my, getting familiar with psychedelic world, and then the research that's coming out from Hopkins on psychedelics for end of life, and, patients with terminally ill diagnoses, it just opened up my horizon and really expanding my conscious awareness of what is available and why, and my own whys, my own sources of what is it that's burning me out? What am I also, doing or not doing? What am I listening to and not listening to? Who am I trying to please? And why? And, through these journeys, I was able to see my own childhood trauma, from the war, from living under a terrorist regime. And that significantly helped me discover where the fears are coming from and see it now from an observer seat instead of being in the judgment seat of like, why am I, like judging myself and criticizing myself for feeling the way I was feeling. But then again, there were very dark moments that I had. And yes, suicide definitely crossed my mind several times. And at the time I had one child. I'm like, I can't have this. Like, what is happening? I have to do something different. And so slowly I started building my way back in to myself. I was very far away from who I really was. I was this, fun, extroverted, loving my community, like doing things in life and projects and this and that, to a complete introvert, not being able to hold a conversation with anyone, shying away from it, just very dark places. And it was, to be, completely, honest with you guys, it was an LSD trip for me that was a hero's journey, is what we call it in the psychedelic realm, and a very challenging journey, that I was then able to see my fears for what they are and where they came from, and see them as just that they were experiences that are no longer going on. And so I don't need to be afraid anymore, that I don't live, I'm safe. I don't live under a terrorist regime anymore. But parts of our subconscious hold on to the story and of the trauma. It just stays there as a survival strategy and a survival mechanism. And you put up all these armors and you think you're fine until you have an experience like that. And you're like, whoa, no, I'm not fine. And there was a lot there that I needed to come back to life and integrate. And, I bring the story up because obviously it's my story and it was very challenging. And psychedelics are not to be used willy-nilly. It's like playing with fire. You have to have respect. You have to understand the sacredness of these medicines and understand that there are ways to approach it. The dosage matters, the environment matters, the guide matters, the person who's going through it, their mindset matters. So it is not to be taken lightly. This topic is a very important topic to talk about and to converse about in an open way, to make sure that if individuals are wanting to partake for betterment of their mental health, they need to do it under the proper guidance with people that they really and truly trust and they're in alignment with.
Yeah, I think the analogy of fire is wonderful, because you can use fire to warm yourself, you can use fire to cook food, or you can burn someone's house down. And this whole business of recreational psychedelics, it's kind of like, hey, let's juggle fire. Well, maybe we shouldn't. Maybe we should be, and I've always said, we ignore ancient wisdom to our own peril, because if it's truly ancient wisdom, it will still exist today. If it was ancient bullshit, we wouldn't know about it because no one would be doing it. And so when you look at, it's fascinating to me when you look at different intoxicants, for a better word, lack of a better word. Okay. So tons of cultures drink coffee. You get up in the morning, drink coffee, you become productive. Lots have tobacco. Most, not all, have alcohol. And it's clearly a celebrant. Jesus turned the water into wine. It was at a party. They were partying with wine. It was a celebration. But these substances in ancient cultures were always medicine, which I find really fascinating. It wasn't like, the North American Indians rolled a joint of peyote because they had just killed a buffalo and they wanted to relax and hang out. No, they were vision quests. They were sweat lodges. They were for these unbelievably profound spiritual experiences to guide them through life. And And so I think that makes sense, because the people I've listened to that have had these experiences and had their lives profoundly improved, that's exactly the experience they have. It wasn't like, they went to a Black Sabbath concert and did a couple dabs of acid and somehow everybody's happy.
Absolutely. And if you look at, MDMA, for example, in the rave culture, MDMA has been used for decades. But you also look at the rave culture, they shouldn't have any mental health issues, right? If that's, we're just saying, oh, it's just the intoxicant or the medicine. No, it's what we do with it. How do we gain meaning in our life? What intention we're going into with using the medicine with, and who are we doing it with? There's a whole way of going about it. So it is healing if you're looking for healing. And, it's very interesting. I've given some, major talks about this, and several people after the talk, from the 1960s and 70s, they come up to me, and, when they grew up in that era, and they come and they say, it's so interesting you talk about it in this way, because back then we were just melting our faces off, we're just trying to lose our minds, and what you're talking about is such a shift of using these as true medicine to heal our mental health suffering, or at that inner suffering. And it's not just mental. We have, this lack of a better term, honestly. It's a whole being healing. It's not this part of me, is just getting healed. It's just, it's not reductionist like that. We do what we do in medical terms. It's much more expansive than that. There's spirituality that's involved. People who have gone through higher doses of psilocybin ceremonies, they come out, the Hopkins study in 2015 that came out, these individuals at the end of life, there were 52 of them. They gave psychotherapy plus, psilocybin, 1 dose psilocybin session, and then psychotherapy afterwards, pretty intensive and spiritual care. And almost every single one came out saying that this was their top 5 most mystical and most important experience of their life. So
wow.
Very significant. Mm-hmm.
I have, so many questions, and I know that our listeners will too. And I'm a physician. We just left Oregon where they were voting this in legally to be used medically, and people are asking questions. I'm like, I don't even know how it's used. I mean, medically, I had, the same kind of experience growing up, people just using it recreationally, whatever. But so can you just start with educating us? Like, how do you even start with using psilocybins medically? What's sort of the stepwise approach? What does it help with? Yeah, how does this even happen?
Absolutely. And, that's why I have a whole certification program for physicians specifically, because that's really where my heart is. And I think with knowing this information and knowing how to do it in your own life, you're able to now present it to other people, your patients, clients, and so forth. And we can change how we practice medicine at large that way. But and do you want to speak about psilocybin specifically? Do you want to, I can also give you an overview of what I do with my clients.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's do that.
Is that better?
Okay. Let's start there.
Yeah. And I've done this for a number of years now, for about 5 years with clients. And before that, it was, my own self-experiment. So, looking at the research of, hey, you need somebody before, during, and after. Okay. Then I'm talking about the large dose right this moment to do this work with. And then I'll talk to you guys about the microdosing as well, because that's a lot more accessible to people. And it's not as much of a, hazard, if you will. So knowing that model and having really experimented with that model, I created a coaching program that I go through with people. And the first month of it, we only implement what I call conscious life practices. Mm-hmm. And we do education around them. We implement into life, because knowledge is just not enough anymore. we have to implement in life. If you're not walking it, you're not doing it. It's not going to do anything for your life. And I'm speaking from a place of, if I don't do it, I don't talk about it. So we go through this path together. I do these exercises every single day. I have 19 conscious life practices that I teach people, and we do this together. But just a few of them that are super accessible to us is, how do I regulate my autonomic nervous system? By breathing, nose breathing specifically. So when you only breathe through the nose, you're activating the vagus nerve and the parasympathetic nervous system more so than if you're mouth breathing. So we start there a lot of times, and it depends. I assess the person on their needs as well and where they are, so we can customize and meet them where they are. Meditation is an ancient practice that we just forgotten about. How to do it, period. How do I sit with myself alone in a space without moving, without fidgeting, without doing? How do I learn to be by myself in this moment? Then, we go through the whole gamut of sleep education, how much it matters to our well-being. And we know there's so many studies looking at anxiety, depression, suicidality, much worse when we don't sleep, period. We know this. And so the first few weeks, this is what we work on. So I make sure that, their nervous system that's been in this super sympathetic overdrive for the past 20 years is now becoming more regulated, and we're getting closer to homeostasis before ever introducing medicine. Right now I have a medical director or section chief for pediatric anesthesiology in the East Coast, and this is what she's going through. And by just introducing some of these methods, she's feeling that, she's like, oh my gosh, like I feel the roller coaster finally. And she's taking herself off of Adderall that she was on for 11 years.
Wow.
Because they're working, they're equilibrating her nervous system. So that's where we always start. And then I start with microdosing. So that's and I'll tell you the microdosing. Macrodose is a whole different realm of, it's a different thing. But so then we start with the microdosing, but I'm talking very, very low doses, very low doses. And I'll give you ranges so you have an idea. Anywhere from about 5 milligrams of psilocybin to 250 milligrams of psilocybin. We call that a micro dose. From 250 milligrams to about a gram, we call that a mild dose. From a gram to about 2.5 grams, we call that a moderate dose. And then 2.5 to 5 or 6 grams, which usually don't go to, that's a hero's dose. That's a large macro dose. So in what we're talking about right now, and majority of my clients that I work with and the certification I'm giving right now is talking about how do I teach people how to microdose. So it's anywhere between 5 milligrams to 250 milligrams. I don't go over that with them, because I want people to become comfortable with how do I use these tiny low doses, and less is more. If I ever see people are wanting to take more, I'm like, okay, let's back up. Why are you wanting more? Let's talk about that. Let's get to the source. Because the objective here is that you need less. If you're truly facing your traumas and fears and issues, you should need less. You should not need more. And if you need more, it's possible that we are escaping. We're trying to escape.
Well, this is really grooving to my rhythm, because this is completely the opposite of what we traditionally would do in pharmacotherapy from a psychiatric perspective. Oh, you're depressed.
Yeah.
You're depressed because you have a chemical imbalance in your brain, which was entirely made up.
You need more.
Total bullshit.
Entirely made up. Yes.
So take this serotonin drug again. the serotonin theory of depression has been totally disproven. It's complete nonsense. Take this, and oh, by the way, you will have no libido, and you won't really feel good, but you won't really feel bad. So yippee-ki-yay, see me in 2 weeks. And, rinse and repeat over and over again. And the drug company gets super rich. And I can see that in 5 or 10 minutes and can see the next patient. So everyone's happy except the patient, because it's patient last, right? And this whole concept of you need less medicine, because you should need less medicine because you're getting better and you're getting more balanced and you're dealing with your stuff. That I love, because that's the point. It's like you're getting fitter. So you should run faster. Your heart rate shouldn't go up as high when you go run to your car at the end of work.
But I have so many questions still. So we probably cut you off too soon, but I'm thinking.
But the whole concept, I think we're starting from a foundation of making people better so they don't need us, which is entirely the opposite of what the healthcare system promotes, which is we'll keep you sick. It's like drug pushers.
Absolutely. And the moment we said the patient is not responsible for their own health, that's the moment we changed the medical practice into a business practice.
Right. Yep. 100%.
Exactly.
And now now we're saying, hey, take responsibility. It's your stuff. And I'm here as a guide to show you to yourself.
That's exactly, which is the other thing that's very interesting. These people from the 60s that were taking it to melt their faces off were trying to escape reality.
Yes,
absolutely.
You're using psilocybin to find reality.
So how does it do that? Because I'm thinking, all right, people are working. Are they going through a separate counseling program while they're trying to, do these actionable steps, and just really unpack all their baggage, or do they do that in conjunction with you? And is the microdosing to kind of help them through this time, or is something happening mentally that they're discovering something while on the drug? Tell us how this works.
Yeah, absolutely. So majority of it in my coaching practice, I do myself. So I have learned all kinds of tools I don't know if you guys are familiar with internal family systems, with, inner child work, with somatic work, embodied practices. So, the 19 conscious life practices that I was talking about, it has all of it. It's a very comprehensive, it's honestly the most comprehensive program I've come across in the coaching realm, because we hit every system, we hit everything we work with is looking at the individual from a different angle. And then looking at them from a different angle, and the psilocybin microdosing is just giving you a different angle. That's it. It's just another tool. It's not the end all be all. It's the work that the individual is putting forward and the commitment to their self-discovery and feeling better. That's the work.
And what does psilocybin do as that adjunctive tool?
Yeah. Beautiful. Great questions, by the way, May. Wonderful. So what psilocybin does is manyfold. And every individual gives me a little bit of a different answer, okay? But what I see a common thread is the anxiety is gone, so I can breathe. I actually notice that I'm breathing for the first time in my life. They feel more calm. There's more of a brightness to life. And the dosages I'm talking about, again, very, very small dosages. And they are thought to be sub-perceptive in the literature. But when somebody, a lot of people, they start it and they're like, oh, it's not working for me. I'm like, so did you feel calmer? Yeah. Well, it's working for you. And that may be the subtle difference that they feel. But guess what? For 25 years, they have never felt calm until this moment. So we're not talking about visuals. We're not seeing fractals. We're not seeing any of that. That's at higher dosages. You could, in a moderate range, you could probably see that. Or with people, everybody has a little bit of a different sensitivity as well. So maybe over 250 or 500 milligrams, then you would see some visual changes. But that's not the point. We're not trying to do that. We're trying to change people's thought patterns. of this self-sabotage, self-betrayal ways of doing life to, hey, oh my gosh, I can't believe I've been doing that. Like just simple things like asking for help when you need help, getting out of your own way and saying, hey, I need help right now. Can we talk? That's huge. Or, hey, my 5-month-old baby needs, to get changed, and husband approaches and I always say, no, I got it. No, I don't got it because I haven't slept in 5 months. And now I'm going to say yes. It's those subtle and very profound changes that happen at the thoughts level. And because they happen at the thought level, it's like, hey, I was riding this train of, no, I got it, and I'm driving myself into the ground and life sucks, to, oh, I have an option of jumping onto the train of, no, I do need help. And when I do get help, I feel so much better. And I'm just feeling better now because now I'm on this train on a completely different pattern of life. And this happens subtle, it's, one step at a time. But it's fascinating when I have my clients from from first session to like the 5th session, I'm like, oh my God, you're a different person.
Wow.
This anesthesiologist, you started coming off of her, Adderall and propranolol. Now she has a schedule to come off of her SSRI, which she has tried before. And it has been so difficult. And I don't know if you guys know, but SSRIs are extremely difficult to come off of. And
yes, we know.
To the point that people won't come off of them because they just can't. Like, what are we doing in medicine? It's just unreal.
Well,
right.
But that's the point.
We know that professionally and even personally.
Yeah, but that's the point, right? Like the thing that always just blows my mind is it's the utter lack of common sense. Yeah. If our stupid food pyramid that we came up with in 1974, putting, bread and cereal as more important than, healthy proteins and all this, if that worked, then then why are we a country of fat, depressed diabetics, right? Mm-hmm. If it worked, we should be miles ahead of where we were 40 or 50 years ago, but we aren't. We're less healthy. Right. We're more if antidepressants worked, where we have 10% of the entire population on antidepressants, we should be happy, fun time clown land. Instead, we're just clown land, but we're not happy. We're the depressed clowns. And that's the part that just gets me. Like I did a lecture on this, man, it must have been 10 years ago, where I basically came out and I did a CME and I said, most of what we do in medicine is bullshit. It doesn't do anything and it's probably harmful. So that was really well received. But it was fascinating because one of the only people that came up to me and kind of patted me on the back was a senior psychiatrist that had 25 or 30 years of experience. And he said, you kind of wrapped words around my entire life experience. I was like, if what I'm doing and prescribing actually works for people, why am I seeing the same patients every week for 20 years?
Right.
And he's like, because it doesn't do anything.
Yep. That's what it's about, right? You make more money off of the same person. It's that returning customer marketing scheme, right? Except then that they're super hooked, like from a life perspective, now they're hooked and then their whole family is fucked, their whole life is just
totally
like, God, yeah.
And we think chiropractors are bad. Like, it's like they're not killing you with drugs. They're just charging you to massage your back, and it actually feels pretty good. This is wild.
They're not creating zombies out of people.
Exactly.
Yes.
So is there a certain subset of mental health struggles, issues that this works for better? I'm hearing, ADD, depression, anxiety. Can you tell us how this works, even what the biochemical kind of nature of how it works?
Oh, sure. So psilocybin, I love that. Thank you so much for the questions. They're right on. Psilocybin is a naturally found tryptamine. It is found in over 200 species of mushrooms and counting, because there are millions. I think there's an unlimited number of different species of mushrooms. And it's been used for human evolution for millennia. We have carvings in stone in Algeria from 9000 BC. The Eleusinian mystery rites in ancient Greece were held every 5 years using psilocybin and a concoction, a drink called kykeon, that had ergotamine and psilocybin. And, it's fascinating. It's fascinating. So history is millennia. For 2 millennia in ancient Greece, they used kykeon every 5 years. And people like Marcus Aurelius came out of that. People like Plato, people like Aristotle and Socrates, and so many of those philosophers came from that era. And then Christianity came. And, when one of the first, I forget his name, one of the kings who, was a devout Christian, came in and destroyed all the evidence and destroyed all of that, and called these were women that were creating these, concoctions, that was secrets in a secret society, and demoted the women from these very high ranking government jobs, just status, really. And they destabilized that whole thing. And this is, if you look at the Immortality Key, a history of a religion with no name, written by Ryan Murescu, he goes through that entire archaeological history, all evidence-based. He himself has never used psychedelics, but he had seen so much evidence in ancient history. He's like, we got to look at this. What are we doing? And so it's been used for millennia. And the way it works in our brains as we know it, though our research is really in its infancy, is that we see serotonergic activity. So 5-HT2A receptors are what we see being activated in particular areas of the brain when somebody is using psilocybin, though that is just one tiny tidbit that we know. And what's crazy is that there are pharmaceutical companies now that are trying to extract the psilocybin only from the entire plant and just give that to patients, which concerns me significantly, because we now know there's at least 5 different psychoactive compounds. It's not just psilocybin. We're learning. And so just leave it alone. Just trust the plant. The plant knows. Like, what are we doing? It has everything we need. Why are we trying to extract,
Because you can patent it and make money. That's why.
Yeah.
Because it's exactly the same. It like morphine was 1850. Yep. And the whole idea was we'll pull the active good opiates, the non-addictive opiates, and the opiates that don't make you sick. We'll pull those alkaloids out of the opium poppy latex, and everyone will be fine, and no one will have pain. Yeah. Well, how did that turn out?
Yep.
It's the same exact thing. They'll pull the psilocybin out. They'll change one hydrogen bond, or they'll add, or they'll make it an enantiomer with the same thing, and then they'll patent it, and now it'll be advertised.
And now it's addictive.
Yes.
That's 100%.
Because as we know it, research shows that psilocybin is not addictive, period. It just is not addictive. And that's why it's so powerful. Ask me more questions, May. I might have forgotten other questions.
That's okay. So first off, patients do this guided therapy and psilocybin with you or their physician. Now, is this all, I'm curious, first off, is this done mostly by psychiatry? Is this done just through different physicians that are trained like you are? How does someone find someone like this?
Yeah, there aren't that many of
educated.
us.
and I'm thinking also in my head, what state legalizes this? Because, we came from Oregon, where first most drugs were a misdemeanor, like heroin and meth and cocaine, and they had to vote in.
I'm going to become a meth counselor.
Right. But
in other words, a dentist. No.
So what states allow this, and how does someone even start off finding someone?
Yeah, for sure. So Oregon is legal and decriminalized. Colorado is decriminalized and legalized. We are looking at, those are the two main states right now. Parts of California, about 22 cities have decriminalized psilocybin or plant medicines. And Michigan is looking at it. Washington, D.C. is on the way. There are many states that are just like popping up. They're looking at it from a healing standpoint, and they're looking at plant medicines in general, psilocybin being one of them. And, there's a whole slew of them that we can talk about later. But, in those states, it's fine, and federally, they're not even talking about it because it's still a substance, Schedule 1 substance, which is crazy to me. Alcohol is the most dangerous drug that we've looked at. And then psilocybin is the least on that list of substances. And here we are, we're talking about Schedule 1,
same with weed.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So you sit around and eat Doritos and play video games and giggle a little bit and wake up not hungover.
Thank you. And not with liver disease and Alzheimer's and the cirrhosis, right?
Yeah, like it's just, I'm not advocating for, I'm pretty libertarian with all this stuff, but we've walked the absolute hellscape that is complete deregulized. We lived in Oregon, and you stepped over bodies. People would travel there because they knew that they would be brought food if they just shot meth up in the streets. So, there has to be some boundaries and balance, but at the same time, there has to be some common sense.
Common sense. And that's what it's about. It's common sense. And May, to go back to your question about who's doing this, how, people can find people, it's honestly very few people as physicians who are coming out and saying, hey, I know of something to help you with your fear of death at the end of life. And I'm happy to be with you through this process. And I've done that before. I've reached out to, physician moms who are with stage 4 pancreatic cancer with a 6-year-old. And she's so afraid of death. And I'm like, and she's dying of anxiety, locked up in her room, in a dark room, just crying all day because I'm going to die in 3 months. And she's still alive 8 months later, And just with that anxiety gone, she's been living. And I'm not saying she's not going to die. She's going to die. We're all going to die, period. But can I connect with my child on the days that are remaining? Can I connect with my husband on the days that are remaining? And so a lot of my work has been kind of, hush hush. A lot of my work has been done in the legal states. Or legal countries, where, in Mexico and a lot of South American countries, you say psilocybin, is it legal? They're like, what are you talking about? It's a plant, like legal? Like that's just part of their culture. It's such a part of their culture. They just sit on the beach and they'll have a cap or two as a microdose to commune with each other, to be together, to have heartfelt connections, to open up to each other. And so, and we know from certain tribes in South America, if there is instability within a community, they have psilocybin ceremonies starting at age 8, and the entire tribe gets together and has a community ceremony, which cannot be more beautiful than that. It's very heart opening. And so you're able to truly connect without putting up these walls, of ego. And so to find people, I have people reach out to me because I don't know that many physicians or psychiatrists that are doing this work. And trusting people takes time and getting to know them. And I don't know, to be completely honest. No. There are a couple of national organizations that have formed. Mind Bloom is one of them, but they use ketamine. I'm not a huge ketamine fan because of the addictive potential and all the other complications that you can have from ketamine. Psilocybin has no addictive potential. And that's why, so far, that's my choice of what to use, at least right now. I'm experienced in using, I got my certification in ketamine as well, but it's just not the one that I like going towards. And how we practice it right now in majority of places, not every ketamine clinic is the same, but majority of places are not doing it ethically. And so I don't want to have anything to do with that.
What you're talking about really makes me think of what I've really been thinking about this a lot. We've interviewed lots of people that have had trauma and had recovered, through therapy, through forgiveness, through, spiritual experiences and so forth. And May's one of them. I mean, she's been really open about, she was sexually abused for 3 years in elementary school, and how the ultimate road was lots of therapy and eventually just forgiving the perpetrator and letting it go.
Yes.
And I think that where we've been very muddled in Western medicine is we equate mental illness as, this kind of mysterious chemical imbalance that somehow everybody from 1980 somehow magically got. And we forget trauma, and they're not the same thing. I mean, there's people that are raised in a decent family and haven't had giant traumas, and they turn 19 years old and they have a schizophrenic break and they're schizophrenic. Those are people that are profoundly mentally ill. And, they used to be kind of the purview of psychiatry only. Well, then every single thing is a psychiatric diagnosis, anxiety, self-esteem, like whatever it is. And a lot of these that become debilitating are traumas. You take a healthy 19-year-old and you send them into war and they come back utterly broken. Well, they're not mentally ill. They're traumatized. It's different, and it needs to be treated differently. Yes. But we treat it all the same. We give them, we give them SSRIs and benzos and a little bit of group therapy, and we think it works. It's not mental illness. And that it just drives me crazy. It's like somebody coming in with an obvious virus and giving them antibiotics all the time. No, it doesn't work. It actually is harmful bad for you. Yeah. And it's hurtful. You're killing your good bacteria. That's bad. Don't ever do that. So
don't do it. Yep.
It's so fascinating to me. Like, this trauma aspect really needs to be pushed. Like, I could beat the drum all day long on this. So many people are suffering trauma. They're suffering trauma they didn't even realize was trauma, but they have these terrible behaviors as a consequence, and they just need to walk that road.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I'm the case in point, right? I didn't even perceive those childhood events as traumatic per se, because I had a loving container as I was moving through it. But they were, and they stick with you. And, and that's another way of looking at it, right? With psilocybin, what it helps you do, or psychedelics, MDMA is another wonderful medicine to be used in PTSD, especially for veterans. It's being studied at the FDA level in phase 3 clinical trials as a breakthrough treatment, because 70% of the veterans who have been on multitude of medications are now in remission from one session. Now, not one session, just MDA, yes, but it's extensive psychotherapy as well. So we have these beautiful, ancient, novel therapeutics that we can use to see ourselves and to examine our traumas from a different lens. And that examination without the emotional involvement seems to be very therapeutic. And so, we're kind of at this edge of discovering and rediscovering these medicines in a different way, which is so exciting.
Do you, so I have a couple of questions. Have you treated many veterans yourself that have PTSD experience with that? And then I want to get into the macro dosing and when you use that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
For parties.
To melt our faces off.
Yes.
No, I hope not. It's dangerous. As far as veterans, I've had several who've approached me. I have not had any in my program per se. My niche is the female physicians. And so that's who I've gone after. Yes.
Yeah.
And it's been incredible. This work has been incredible. I have the female physician who was suicidal for 10 years every single day of her life straight. And she went to ketamine treatment for 8 weeks, became more suicidal. And I asked her, hey, so what was the setting and who guided you? No one. and it was a sterile clinical environment, in and out. And she was like, I was having all kinds of visions and, hallucinations, and she didn't even know what to do with them. And she became more suicidal. And that's malpractice. That's
Wow.
unethical. And so to me, you got it. Like, that's why my coaching program is comprehensive. I do the work before together, and then we really delve into things together during the 8-week period. So, to answer your question, I have not done work with veterans directly, though I get a lot of questions from them. And the macrodosing, you also got to do the work. You got to do the work. And if I have somebody who comes to me and is just interested in the macrodose and has not done any trauma work, or is not interested in it, or is not interested in coaching portion of what I offer, I say, no, go to South America. I mean, they're doing these retreats like left and right, like,
Right.
That's not what I do. I'm going to do source work. We're going to work together. There's a ton of commitment in this before, during, and after. And what comes up, is what you're ready to see and face. And so knowing how to sit for someone and to facilitate as the medicine is working, and that ceremony creation of container, that's a whole different realm. And, I will provide that certification and offer it at some point, but that's a significant amount of time that you need to spend understanding these realms within yourself, number one, and then being able, like, sitting for other people for a while and watching what a guide who's experienced does in these situations. Because, I'm an osteopath, and during my sessions, sometimes I use OMT, or osteopathic manipulative treatment. I have people who dive deep into their trauma and they feel like they're not breathing. They're breathing, they're just fine. And we've looked at these medicines from a research perspective, thousands of patients now. There is no issue. Like, no one comes out, very few people come out with true adverse outcome. And those situations have happened when they don't have the proper guide and guidance before and after. If you don't have that container, you're signing up for potential danger, and at least 10% adverse outcome if you don't have that container. But if you do have that container, it's zero, almost.
What about DMT?
DMT, dimethyltryptamine, is found in a lot of plants, and it actually is found in our own CNS fluid at very tiny doses. And it's a molecule that we see being released or maybe bound by the receptors at the end of life, which is really interesting. And, there's, again, the research is pretty much in its infancy for DMT. For MDMA and psilocybin, we know more, because now we're looking at large, clinical trials. For DMT, we know some studies from the 1990s by Dr. Rick Strassman, who's also a mentor of mine.
Spirit Molecule. And he just finished writing, or last year, he published the Psychedelic Handbook. So he goes into a lot of these details of, chemicals and chemical pathways. He's a researcher and a psychiatrist. He was actually at UNM doing this work using federal funding during the war for drugs. I love it. He was on my podcast, actually, my second episode, and he talks about it. We laugh every time he brings it up. I'm like, this is just the best story. But DMT has not been, his studies were specifically to look at the scientific aspect of DMT, and as the vital signs and lab work and all of that goes for the subjects. And he was the first one to study DMT in human subjects in an injectable form. And he gave them really high doses. They did a dose response kind of a thing, and no one had an adverse outcome from a perspective of vital signs and things like that. Now, from a psychospiritual perspective, some of them did. About 10% had a
you can call it a psycho-spiritual emergency.
Wow.
That's why this is a big deal to do it right. Now, that study that he did was specifically to look at the scientific portion, and they did not at all include therapy with it.
Yeah, I remember I watched the documentary and it was wild. Like they literally just put them on gurneys and had, life support stuff like you're doing anesthesia, and hammered them with these massive doses, and they would trip for like 10 or 15 minutes, and it felt like 3 or 4 hours. And some people came back and they're like, I know exactly what I'm supposed to do with my life.
Sign me up.
I talked to my dead parents. Everybody's forgiven, check all the boxes. And it was wild. I mean, it was just, from one experience,
Wow.
the completely
From
different
one experience.
But if you have a 10% chance of a bad trip, I don't know that I want to take those odds to Vegas.
No, neither do I. Neither do I, my friend. That's why that's not something that I provide, because I know it is with the container that we know. We just know now. Hey, and I know from my personal experience and providing these experiences for clients, if you do it in this way, in this best practice way, you're going to be fine. Your client is going to be fine. And that's such a gift. Like I feel so overwhelmingly grateful to have been given these gems through my own challenges so that I can talk to you guys about it now and today. It's fascinating. I mean, 5 years ago, I never thought I'd be, on like mainstream media talking about and educating people so that we are careful, because we have to be careful. Yeah.
Well,
absolutely.
I couldn't agree more, because it's just like what's happened with the liberalization of marijuana laws. Okay, so you have people, and they know how to use a little bit every few days, and it's a really great tool for them, and it's no big deal. And then you have people where, weed cures cancer, weed cures anxiety, and then kids using it, and like and you're like, no, I'm sorry, it doesn't. It's probably a pretty effective tool for certain people, but it's not a panacea that does all this stuff. And so tools are only useful if they're used for what they're designed to be used for. An electric drill is a terrible hammer, but it's a great electric drill. And
exactly.
And so that's where we need to go. And I loved having this conversation, because these are the conversations where you can convince people that are on the fence, because they think it's the sweat lodge and smoke, and they're on the side of a mountain.
Well, they're
and
just
some
naive,
guys beating a drum, and
all
those.
They're ignorant. They don't know. I mean,
and all those things may be fine. They may all be great, but the fact is if you treat this with respect, there really appears to be some amazing therapeutic benefits, and we shouldn't be denying people those benefits, especially in this morass of somebody. Like, I sat there, you said this person was on, Adderall, an SSRI, and
propranolol.
Propranolol. So the propranolol for the side effects of the Adderall and the anxiety, and then the SSRI for God knows what.
Everything.
Yeah,
Everything.
For everything. Because they cure everything, including erections. They cure erections.
That's everything. Yeah.
And let me go back to your question, because you brought up for what is it good for, right? So we do see it being great for OCD and anxiety and depression and all those things. Now, as Tim was saying, and addiction, we got to look at the source. Like, where's the trauma coming from? How can we address that and bring love and forgiveness to that and move through and let go? And the medicine really helps us do that. Truly, it's amazing how much it helps in doing that kind of work. And so there are a couple of caveats, diagnoses that we got to be very careful with when we're talking about psychedelic medicines. And those two are schizophrenia and bipolar.
Yeah.
Good point.
So if anyone has had a manic episode, a psychotic episode, or history of schizophrenia or any of that, you got to be extremely careful or not use it at all. Or maybe with a lot of bipolar, what we're seeing now too is that it is rooted in deep trauma that has not been resolved.
Gotcha.
So I would do the trauma work before I ever give them medicine. And I think this population of patients, schizophrenics, the postulation, we don't have a lot of hard evidence on this. They may have more DMT receptors than the rest of us. And so, right. And that's just fascinating to know. And you're like, oh, maybe they're just, plugged in. And in fact, they don't need psychedelics. They need things that bring them into this world and ground them, like exercise, like nutrition, like, community, things like that. So, it's an interesting thing to look at as well, but they definitely deserve their own set of research and just,
Well, it's interesting. You said bipolar, and, I hadn't thought about this for years and years, but, there's true bipolars, and, people that have honest to goodness manic episodes. They can, have psychotic breaks during their mania, and then they have these prolonged periods of depression. It's clear. But, back in the early 2000s, we invented bipolar type 2. We basically pulled the diagnosis out of our asses so that we could sell more Zyprexa. Yeah, exactly. And I know this because I actually worked for Lilly and did some speaking for Zyprexa. And I look back at it now with a much more jaundiced eye, and I go, they just manufactured a diagnosis. Yep. They just made it up. It's That's like, well, there's people that get kind of high, but they're really mostly depressed, and they're, I got accused of this because I'm high energy and I'm kind of hyperactive, and then I have down periods. No, you're a high energy person that has down times. That's what it is. It's not
as you should.
It's
as you should.
Yeah, like it's just crazy, and it's like and then giving the 95-year-old patient an SSRI because she's lost her husband of 75 years. You know what?
You're
supposed to be sad.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're supposed to be sad for
that. Exactly. Acceptance of the human experience. And when we talk about psychedelics too, yes, you are going to have better days if you do it right than not. But it doesn't mean that you're not going to feel depressed some days. You're going to feel anxious some days. But now you have tools, and not just the psychedelics, but life practices that you can go into, with my anesthesiologist, who's just this amazing human. She now sits in the meetings, and if she's feeling the anxiety, she breathes. She just breathes as the meeting is going on, and that's reachable, that's accessible momentarily. She just has to remember to do it. And being vulnerable as a human, open your heart to the people that you're talking to. And just by those couple of things, couple of changes, even without the medicine, her life has changed, and the Adderall and the Propanol that she came off of was not with medicine, was not with psilocybin. It was with the life practices that we implemented. So, we have tools. We have many different tools that we've known for a long time. It's just that we have not looked at them,
Well, it's interesting because I was thinking of this. I read some quotes from Aldous Huxley over the last few days. And, you think, well, what if we had a pharmaceutical that just made you happy no matter what your circumstances were? Would anybody really want that? And the answer is no, because then you have a tyrant that can 100% control whoever he wants, which is exactly what happened in Brave New World. Mm-hmm. They gave all the ditch diggers and all the people that weren't the elites that controlled the world Soma, which was the drug, even though there is a drug named Soma now.
Soma.
But
they gave them Soma. Ancient,
and then they would just be happily digging ditches and not giving any care to anything because they were just mentally essentially zombified.
Yeah.
And so I love this whole, I don't want to say metric, but this whole concept of using medicine as medicine. So it takes you from point A to point B. And you have these self-realizations, you get a better life. Just like if you have strep throat and we treat you with an antibiotic, you're better in, a day or two earlier than you would be, and you go on with your business and you're off the medicine. That's what medicine should do. This concept of somehow everyone needs to be on 15 pills for the next 40 years literally makes my cerebrum explode.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's what I love about hospice medicine, because patients come on and they take them off.
Yes.
So, yeah, and you get rid of
I'm like,
them.
come on, we don't need this. We don't need this. I mean, I just love it. I'm like, yeah, this is great. And they're, some patients come on and they're eating more drugs than food. I'm like, what are we doing? And on the same note, Tim and May, let me tell you, it's, with microdosing, for your audience, for your listeners to remember, if you ever see anywhere you got to be on this microdosing every single day of your life, run away from that person. No, this is to be used just like, as you said, hey, I use it once a week. I use it once a month. I use it, once every 3 months. And a microdose, less is more.
Outstanding. Great place.
Can you, okay, I love that. I was just thinking in my head, kind of like what we thought Valium was supposed to be, which turned into a total disaster.
Yeah. Well, 2 martinis and a Valium,
you
feel amazing.
I've
never tried it, but I take your word for it.
No, but I mean, that's the point. It was literally this. That was what Mama's Little Helper back in this 70s.
No kidding.
Yep.
Well, can you share a little bit with us about your upcoming book, Trauma to Self-Love? Is it tied together, or what's in there? Just a little sneak peek, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. The past hour we've been talking about has been the sneak peek. So I actually, I've been doing my coaching for a few years now, and these concepts and these conscious life practices have shown to be so effective in people's lives, especially professionals and, female physicians. And I have some male physicians, but more female physicians and some professionals in the community, that I was like, you know what, I should put this in the book so that it's accessible to everybody. So it's literally what I was just telling you about. The 19 or 20 different conscious life practices is the beginning of the book, the first section. And the second section is the education on psilocybin as medicine. So we go through the scientific look at it, examination of it, and the historical examination, and then how do you use it in your life as a microdose. We touch on macrodose just a little bit, but not a lot, because that's a whole different realm of the medicine. And so it deserves its own book. And then there's a lot of stories that I tie in with, from my own clients who've given me consent to share even their name, but I'm not doing that to give them, privacy, but some incredible stories in there also. So I'm super excited for it. The first section, I'm literally running people through, hey, this is how you implement conscious life practices. This is the education behind it. This is the prescription for it. This is how you meditate. This is how you do like 5 minutes of breathing. This is how we implement, because knowledge without the implementation is nothing. What are we doing? And
faith without works is dead.
And it's a common problem, right?
Yeah. I mean, you get all the insight you want, and all you've done is, you have a giant pile of belly button lint, but you're still fat because you didn't actually go run.
I love it.
And I think, just personally, that the hardest part is often the implementation, because especially for people who are, and I'm not going to say me, but more intelligent than I, but people who are academics in all fields of work that are, you can self-analyze and figure yourself out and do all these retrospective, introspective, go through all this analysis. And it's like, yeah, I know where my traumas happened. But until you put the work, take the first step, like Tim said, I think I can remember was on this podcast, we just talked to someone else about that, doing the work, like put the running shoes on and just start off with going for the walk. That's the hardest part, is getting the shoes on to go for the walk. Cause I'll look at the shoes. I'll research the running shoes. I will pick out the best color. But to actually start doing the work that's the life-changing stuff, but it's so difficult.
Yeah. One tiny step at a time. One tiny
Exactly.
step every day.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's right.
Is where,
So tell us, where can everyone find your podcast as well as your website and social media?
Awesome. Thank you for asking. So on Apple, Spotify, and Google, you can type in Conscious Physician Medicine and Psychedelics. That's where my podcast is. Website is drlidafatemi.com. And you can find my, both the self-discovery path and the certification path. This past summer, I did a certification course for a group of 20 therapists in town who went through it. And it was awesome. And they still get back to me. They're like, you changed my life. And it just makes me so happy. I'm like, if I was to talk to my grandfather now, I'd be like, now I'm practicing medicine.
I love it.
So I'm now offering that on a national level as well. And then Facebook and Instagram, just Lida Fatemi, and you can find me.
Wonderful.
Outstanding.
Any last words of wisdom or thought that you want to impart to our audience before we wrap up?
Yeah, commit to yourself, because that's the greatest investment you will make in life.
Thank you for joining us on BS Free MD. We hope Dr. Lida Fatemi's inspiring story and insights on psychedelic-assisted healing resonated with you. It sure did with us. And I just love how she respects the medicine. And it wasn't just, tripping and trying to find yourself, which absolutely horrifies me when I hear some of these stories.
No kidding. Hey, remember too that mental health is a journey, and exploring new frontiers can lead to profound changes in your life. And we'd like you to just follow us for some more thought-provoking discussions in the future. And don't forget to check out Dr. Fatemi's work at Dr. Lida, it's Lida Fatemi, FATEMI.com. Stay curious and stay BS free.
All right. Shout out this week. Yes, Judith Lawrence. You are truly amazing. Thank you for always reaching out to us to let us know your thoughts about our email blogs and our adventures. And yes, you're right. This last week's email, it brought me to tears, and I knew the entire story.
Okay, I
already.
love how you called her Judith. She would kill you because we know her very well.
Well, that's what
it's
she
Judy
has.
To us.
Yes, but that's what she has on her socials.
There you go.
So it can be whatever you want.
Yeah. Well, I love our conversations. She's super sweet, has a big heart. We appreciate you caring about us. And as you know, we care for you too. So see you around. Oh, and by the way, if you have feedback for Tim and I as well, email us at doc@bsfreemd.com to find, reach out to us there. And you can find us on our social media as well. Keep it BS free, and see you next time.
It's no secret that medicine is a bit uptight. That's why Tim and I created BS Free MD, to mix things up a little and have fun in the process. Besides, we are having these exact same discussions all the time, so we thought we might as well invite everyone to the party. If you really like us, you can get plenty more, and maybe see one of Tim's cool tattoos on our Instagram or Facebook pages at BS Free MD. See you next time.
While we try to keep BS Free MD as raw and real as possible, we can't be held responsible for any medical decisions or discussions had as a result of what you've heard on the show. We know, bummer. But the truth is, we really do care about your questions. So feel free to reach out to us by email at doc@bsfreemd.com.